The disputed strip, building a war out of ambiguity. It started with a line on a map that refused to sit still. Texans said their border reached the Rio Grande, south and sweeping. Mexico said the Nueces was the line, shorter and safer. Between them lay a no-man's land the width of a small country, dotted with ranchos, thornbrush and rumors. Laws existed there, but they didn't bite. Polk saw the ambiguity and made it useful. Quiet orders moved General Zachary Taylor's army south, past the Nueces, toward the Rio Grande. He told Congress he was protecting customs duties and defending Texas. On the ground, Taylor's men dug in on the riverbank opposite Matamoros and raised earthworks they called Fort Texas. Across the water, Mexican gunners watched, counting barrels and tents, and sent couriers racing inland. Stakes landed hard on both capitals. If Mexico ignored the incursion, it looked weak. If it responded, it risked giving Polk exactly what he needed, a shot he could call aggression. Meanwhile, American newspapers warmed the public with tales of insult and injured pride. American blood on American soil was still a phrase waiting for blood. Taylor's patrols fanned into the scrub, recon parties drawing maps, testing crossings, and skirting ranch houses that had flown Mexican flags a week earlier. From Mexico's point of view, these were foreign troops operating inside their border. From Washington's point of view, it was administrative housekeeping. That was the trap. April 25, 1846. Captain Seth Thornton led 63 dragoons north of the Rio Grande, past the chaparral into a corrugated wash where hoofprints told an old story, scouts shadowing, riders circling. Mexican lancers hit fast, driving the patrol into a cul-de-sac of mesquite and mud. The fight lasted minutes. 16 Americans were killed. Thornton was captured. The rest scattered or fell. News rode harder than the cavalry. By the time the dispatch reached Washington, Polk had a message ready. He told Congress that Mexico had invaded our territory and shed American blood upon American soil. He didn't mention the map that could place that soil on either side of a shifting boundary. The ambiguity did the work. Votes followed. Meanwhile, something else was happening. Mexican commanders at Matamoros faced a brutal equation. Do nothing, and Taylor's fort becomes a permanent thumb on the Rio Grande. Fire the first salvo, and the United States calls it war. They chose to act. Batteries across the river opened on Fort Texas. Taylor marched north, met Mexican forces at Palo Alto, and the wider war pulled itself upright. But to understand why that first shot mattered so much, we need to sit in the rooms where the orders were written. Polk had built his presidency on expansion. He settled Oregon at 49, a compromise with Britain that avoided a fight. That left the Southern Theater. California's harbors tempted merchants and admirals. New Mexico's corridors promised routes to the Pacific. None of that could be sold as naked conquest. It needed a narrative. The disputed strip provided it. Call the Rio Grande the border, and every Mexican patrol north of it becomes an invader. Call the Nueces the border, and Taylor's entire army is trespassing. In that gray zone, whoever framed the story first won the politics. Polk framed it. On the riverbank, the ground told a simpler story. Soldiers boiled muddy water, chewed hardtack that broke teeth, and watched smoke plumes from Matamoros drift like warnings. Local families packed carts, driven not by manifest destiny, but by the price of staying between two armies. Ranchers tried to hide cattle from requisition. Priests heard confessions from men who'd never seen a cannon fired in anger. The ambiguity wasn't just legal, it was human. A Tejano might have a cousin in Matamoros and a tax receipt from Austin. A mail pouch could carry letters stamped by two governments within a week. Flags didn't change the weather, but they changed who came to your door at night. This was the moment everything changed because it proved a theory. Engineer proximity, compress time, and let pride light the fuse. Taylor's slow march south had moved faster than diplomacy. By the time Mexico City's protests found their way through embassies and ministries, there were trenches on the Rio Grande and patrols probing Arroyo's miles inland. Communication lag turned law into rumor. Ulysses Grant, a young lieutenant then, would later write that American forces had been sent to provoke a fight. He wasn't alone in that assessment. But during those opening weeks, the officers kept their opinions to their journals. The machine was already turning. Congress declared war. Volunteers poured south. The disputed strip was no longer a buffer, it was a springboard. In the aftermath, people tried to fix blame on a compass point. Was the Rio Grande the border? The maps disagreed. Treaties signed under duress after San Jacinto gave Texans a claim Mexico refused. Spanish colonial records favored the Nueces. None of that mattered once guns spoke. Borders become real when enough men die on the right side of them. Here's where it gets clear. The Thornton Affair wasn't decisive for its casualties. It was decisive for its phrasing. It gave Polk the sentence he needed. It gave newspapers the headline they could sell. And it gave the United States moral camouflage for a campaign that would run from the Gulf to the Pacific. While cannon smoke thinned over Fort Texas, plans already shifted west. The Rio Grande had served its purpose. The next prize lay along a colder coast, where a deep natural harbor waited for a flag that hadn't arrived yet. Military mismatch. Industrial fire meets pre-industrial courage. Palo Alto wrote it in smoke. American guns reached farther, hit faster, and didn't miss after the third round. Mexican smoothbores thundered and fell short. Lines that looked solid at noon were torn open by evening. The lesson wasn't courage, it was calibration. Here's the math behind it. American flying artillery, horse-drawn, drilled like clockwork, could unlimber, fire, and move before Mexican crews finished swabbing. Standardized shot, rifled pieces coming into service, and trained gunners turned fields into geometry. On both sides, men stood up straight under fire. Only one side fought with a factory behind it. Logistics decided who ate, who marched, and who arrived with dry powder. Quartermasters in blue sent manifests down riverboats, across depots, into wagons that actually showed. Boxes fit muskets because factories cut to pattern, not guesswork. Leather harnesses didn't snap because someone had inspected them against a spec. Meanwhile, Mexican supply ran on personal promises, regional rivalries, and roads that became mud every time the sky darkened. Bravery can't fill an empty cartridge box. Politics bled into packed trains. Since independence, Mexico had flipped governments like pages, dozens of changes in 3 decades. Each new cabinet meant new officers, reissued orders, a different plan for the same frontier. Procurement lagged. Pay stalled. Units loyal to different patrons eyed each other while the enemy marched. You can't build doctrine if the instructor changes every month. Training split the war in 2. West Point turned out engineers who thought with shovels as much as swords. They measured gradients, traced lines of fire, and read terrain like a manual. Ad hoc commands on the Mexican side were built to police provinces, chase uprisings, and keep peace among civilians. That's a different skill set from facing methodical siege work and coordinated artillery. Communication killed as surely as cannon. From Mexico City to the northern frontier took weeks by courier. News aged on the road. A general could win a skirmish that the capital didn't know existed, then lose the campaign to a rumor. Americans moved faster than the letters describing them. By the time orders told a garrison to hold, the garrison was already gone. At Palo Alto, the air smelled of sulfur and grass fire. Mexican cavalry, skilled riders, veterans of civil wars, launched, reformed, launched again, looking for a seam. They found smoke screens and round shot skidding low through horses' legs. Taylor's batteries pivoted as if on rails, crossfiring until pressure broke. It wasn't heroism failing, it was velocity and range winning. Resaca de la Palma told the same story at knife range. Americans pushed through palm thickets with bayonets while dragoon sabers flashed on the road. Mexican units fought hard, then ran out of room, then ran out of ammunition. Retreat lanes jammed. Commanders tried to reform under grape. The pattern repeated: contact, disruption, collapse. Meanwhile, something else was happening beyond the battlefield. The American system replaced losses. Contracts issued in New Orleans ended up as rations in camp within weeks. Replacement parts met damaged caissons with bolts that fit. Mexico's economy, silver mines ruined after the Independence War, treasuries thin, couldn't fund a sustained industrial response. Donations and levies bought muskets. They didn't buy time. Disease did its own accounting. American camps killed Americans more efficiently than Mexican muskets did. Yellow fever, dysentery, cholera, names whispered in tents at night, took 10 for every one shot on some rosters. But the industrial pipeline kept new regiments coming. Mexican soldiers died of the same camps, with fewer surgeons, fewer supplies, and less rest between marches. A war of attrition is won by whoever can afford the attrition. Individual valor never went missing. Mexican infantry held breastworks at Monterrey house by house, forcing street fights stairwell by stairwell. American officers, some barely older than their lieutenants, learned how to turn a fortified corner into a geometry problem. Knock a hole with guns, send engineers to mark lanes, pour in infantry behind a measured curtain of fire. Once you see it, you can replicate it in the next town and the next. Doctrine hardened with each victory. American commanders learned to combine engineers, artillery, and infantry into one moving organism. They cut roads where none existed, built bridges overnight, and set batteries where horses seemed unlikely to climb. Mexican plans had to adapt to a moving enemy with a synchronized clock and interchangeable parts. That's not a fair fight. The distance from superiority to inevitability is discipline. American quartermasters counted nails. Mexican conscripts counted hours since their last meal. When storms came, one force issued ponchos and secured powder. The other prayed for sun and tried to keep Flint dry. You can't bayonet rain, but you can plan through it. Grant would later write that the war was unjust. He also admitted what the ledger showed. An army trained by engineers and fed by factories beats an army trained by necessity and fed by politics. Meanwhile, the real prize wasn't on this prairie. It waited beyond mountain passes and cold harbors, where a navy could reach faster than any courier could warn. California, the $3.6 trillion prize hiding in plain sight. While guns spoke on the Rio Grande, eyes in Washington kept drifting west. Not to deserts or missions, but to water, cold, deep water shaped like a promise. San Francisco Bay could swallow a navy and still leave room for merchants to anchor by the dozen. That wasn't poetry, it was leverage. A harbor-like that turns an Atlantic republic into a two-ocean power. On the ground, Mexican presence in California was thin, presidios stretched, missions secularized, authority more suggestion than system. California ranch sprawled for miles, cattle turning into hides and tallow, ships taking on cargo and leaving silver. Population sat in the low thousands under flag that felt far away. The distance from Mexico City wasn't just miles, it was a tension. Meanwhile, something else was happening offshore. British frigates paid polite visits, merchants opened tabs, and admirals drew mental maps. If London found a foothold, Pacific trade could tilt without a shot fired. That urgency traveled across Washington desks faster than a courier in Sonora ever could. California wasn't an afterthought, it was the plan. American settlers didn't wait for orders. Trappers turned traders, traders turned landowners, and marriages tied families across language lines. The bear flag moment captured the mood. June 1846, a handful of settlers took Sonoma, sketched a flag with a star and a bear, and declared a republic that lasted less than a month. It looked amateur because it was. It also revealed a truth. Mexican governance in California worked until someone tested it. Then the Navy arrived. Commodore John D. Sloat sailed into Monterey and raised a different banner. To the south, Stockton and Fremont stitched military presence to local ambition. Skirmishes flickered, Lowe's angels taken, lost, retaken. But the outcome was never about numbers on a battlefield. It was about ships in harbors and who controlled the customs house when the next brigantine arrived from Canton. Here's where it gets uncomfortable for hindsight. In January 1848, at a sawmill on the American River, workers noticed flakes in the tail race. 9 days later, diplomats put signatures to parchment in Mexico. Gold didn't start the war. It made the stakes look clairvoyant. Within a year, ships jammed San Francisco's coves, crews deserting at anchor to scramble inland. A town of a few hundred blew past 25,000. By 1850, California skipped territorial adolescence and walked straight into statehood. But the gold rush is the loud story. The quiet story is geography. The Central Valley runs like a conveyor belt, snowmelt down the Sierras feeding soil so rich it becomes a national pantry. Rivers bend toward ports. Hills cradle microclimates that, a century later, nurture orchards and vineyards with global reach. You don't need foresight to see a port. You need patience to see an ecosystem. American planners had both. Naval surveys had already charted anchorages. Officers could point to where a dry dock should go, where coastal batteries would command the Golden Gate, where lighthouses would turn fog into guidance. California wasn't merely a prize. It was a grid waiting for investment. The war just cleared the paperwork. Population changed the math faster than any ledger. In 1848, California families could count neighbors by name. By 1852, strangers rented rooms in their outbuildings and paid in gold dust. Courts shifted to English. Land titles written in Spanish, and sometimes in memory more than ink, were forced into an American process that measured boundaries in chains, not landmarks. The treaty promised protection. The Land Act demanded proof. While cases ground on, speculators consolidated. Even so, the Pacific delivered its momentum. Direct routes to China and Japan bypassed old intermediaries. Goods sailed out. Hides, then gold, then grain and lumber, then machine parts, then ideas. Steam replaced sail, rail met dock, and a continental railroad made the bay the western hinge of an eastern machine. What started as a military occupation became supply chains welded to geography. Meanwhile, British caution turned to acceptance. No point contesting a coastline already garrisoned and booming. The Royal Navy could visit. It wouldn't stay. That settled one question and opened 100 more about tariffs, immigration, and who got to profit when ships lined up from Yokohama to Yerba Buena. The human layer is what anchors it. California vaqueros taught newcomers how to ride country that broke eastern horses. Chinese miners staked claims and built businesses when fields turned to stores. Indigenous communities bore the sharpest edge: displacement, violence, disease, costs that don't show in GDP charts but live in cemeteries and erased villages. Prosperity had a shadow. It still does. By the 2020s, California's output rivals entire nations. Tech hums in glass boxes south of the bay, ports lift containers like clockwork, fields in the valley feed a continent, and film money flows like a second river to the sea. The people, nearly 40 million, are the gravity. Capital follows, infrastructure deepens, and advantage compounds. Back in the 1840s, none of this wore numbers, only instincts. Secure the bay, hold the coast, populate the valleys, connect the ocean to the continent. That's the blueprint Polk's war delivered, even if he didn't live to see the skyscrapers. The guns quieted, the ships kept coming, and California, thinly held, loosely governed, breathtakingly accessible, became the engine that justified every risk taken to seize it. Santa Anna's gamble. A deal, a betrayal, a retreat. Unknown to most Americans cheering the early victories, a door had quietly opened in Havana. Santa Anna, exiled, calculating, and still the most recognizable face in Mexican politics, sent word to Washington, "Help me get home, and I'll end this on your terms." Polk didn't trust him. He didn't have to. All he needed was a shortcut. The Navy received discreet instructions: let the general pass. He landed at Veracruz like a man reborn, swearing to negotiate, then flipping the script before the sand dried on his boots. Within weeks, he raised 20,000 men out of the central states, fresher, better supplied than the frontier garrisons that had buckled. He promised the nation a reversal. He promised himself power. The two promises didn't point to the same map. From his perspective, the bargain with Polk had already served its purpose. Cooperation in Excel is theater. Legitimacy in Mexico City requires a different act. Any leader who traded land for peace would fall to a bullet or a mob. Santa Anna had survived too long to mistake survival for principle. He would fight. Meanwhile, something else was happening inside his headquarters. Politics walking in formation beside tactics. He needed a victory dramatic enough to cement his return and quiet rivals, but not so costly it bled his core supporters in the center. That's a hard line to walk in a war where the other side fights with factories and ships. February 1847, the high desert near Buena Vista. Taylor's forces, outnumbered, dug into broken ground, watched dust plumes rise on the horizon like advancing weather. Santa Anna's plan looked sound. Pressure the American flanks, roll their line, crush the center. For hours, it nearly worked. Mexican infantry surged through gullies, cavalry threatened to wrap around, and American positions bent until officers swore they could feel boards creak under their boots. This was the moment everything could have changed. But on the ridges where decisions live, calculation crept in. Santa Anna measured casualties against careers. Could he risk the central regiments, the men whose families mattered in the capital, for a total victory over Taylor that might still leave Winfield Scott marching from Veracruz? He hesitated, then pulled back. The Americans held. The window closed. Grant, who fought there, later called it a narrow escape. Taylor became a hero. Santa Anna kept his army mostly. In the short run, that preserved his political capital. In the long run, it fractured Mexico's defense. The Northern Theater read the retreat as verdict. You can't beat them out here. Garrisons fell back. Morale thinned like smoke. Santa Anna moved south to confront the bigger threat. The amphibious Hammerscott was lifting at Veracruz. Here again, politics shadowed logistics. He demanded loyalty pledges, shuffled commanders, tested allies for signs of ambition. He fought the enemy in front and the rivals behind. The staff work of a civil war doesn't pause for a foreign invasion. At Cerro Gordo, he chose a pass he considered strong: steep slopes, anchored guns, a road bottleneck choking any advance. It should have forced a frontal meat grinder. Instead, American engineers found a goat path and dragged artillery over rock at night. When dawn came, the flanks evaporated. Mexican units fought, then unraveled as fire arrived from unexpected angles. The retreat became a scramble. Cannon lay abandoned on the road like punctuation marks in a panicked letter. This wasn't just tactical failure, it was reputational. Officers who pledged to stand with him watched positions labeled secure collapse in hours. Confidence, already a scarce resource, drained from the command. Meanwhile, civilians along the route saw foreign uniforms in their markets and requisition chits on their doors. The government's grip felt abstract. Authority bleeds fastest in the heartland. Back in the capital, whispers hardened into hesitation. Regional commanders delayed, awaiting instructions. Allies asked for guarantees Santa Anna couldn't honestly give. A pattern set in: bold plan, strong opening, sudden conservation of forces to protect the center, loss of ground, plea for unity. It kept him alive. It didn't keep Mexico intact. His defenders argue he had no real choice. How do you expend the army that props up your regime to save territory that might topple you anyway? His critics answer that the country needed a general and got a politician. The truth sits between. He was both, and in this war that made him neither effective nor trusted. Meanwhile, Scott closed in, carving a corridor from Veracruz to Mexico City with engineers, artillery, and patience. Santa Anna tried to trade space for time, then found time worked for the invader. Each week, American columns moved, supply arrived, and Mexican options shrank. The calculus that had preserved the Central Army now threatened the capital it was meant to protect. In the end, the gamble that began in Havana paid out in reverse. Polk got his war without a partner. Santa Anna got his power without the means to use it. Buena Vista became the emblem. Hours from routing Taylor, then backing off to preserve forces that would be scattered at Cerro Gordo and broken at the gates of Mexico City. The cost wasn't just lost battles, it was credibility. Commanders doubted orders. Civilians doubted the state. Foreign diplomats doubted Mexico's staying power. Reliability, always fragile, snapped. While Mexico watched the north, the east opened like a door. Scott's impossible march, cutting the lifeline on purpose. While Mexico watched the north, the east opened like a door. On March 9, 1847, surf boats bumped through the Gulf shallows and spilled blue-coated infantry onto the sand south of Veracruz.